joint forces deter Houthi militias' advance to front lines in Hodeidah, causing them casualties. The 6-year war in Yemen deepens a humanitarian crisis. The vulnerable children of Yemen suffer as the war continues. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbey. A military source in Hodeidah said that the joint forces spotted Houthi movements advancing to the front lines in Al-Durayhimi to south of Hodeidah. The source added that the joint forces quickly responded to Houthi advancements with direct fires, killing and injuring many among them. According to the source, the joint forces put out Houthi fires that targeted populated areas in Al-Jah and caused casualties among them. Houthi militia renewed their shelling on civilian houses in Al-Tuhaita. Sources said that the Iran-backed rebels targeted populated areas south of Al-Tuhaita with artillery fire and caused them panic and fear among women and children, with warning of new displacement wave. The militia targeted earlier the coastal area of Al-Fazza with heavy mortar shelling. Also in Al-Jabailiyah area, Houthis targeted people's farms and houses with different types of weapons. To Marib, where the Houthi rebels launched a new attack on the city to take back locations to the south of the province. The rebels tried to push into Al-Jabal front with enforcements. Clashes erupted with tribesmen to this front, and the resistance forced the Houthis back with heavy losses. Meanwhile, 2 Houthi engines firing heavy weapons were destroyed, while Houthi locations in Al-Jabal were destroyed by the coalition air raids. Houthi are trying to seize Marib for its strategic location in order to reach for the oil fields. A number of Houthi rebels were killed and injured in Al-Jawf after the government forces backed by popular resistance targeted 2 Houthi groups in Al-Jadafir and Al-Huwaishin fronts. The operation resulted in the destroying some military vehicles used by Houthis. In the same fronts, government artillery destroyed Houthi military vehicles and killed some of their members. Right Radar organization recorded more than 5,000 Houthi violations against civilians in Al-Bayda. The human rights organization said that the Houthi violations took place during the last 6 years. The violation included killings, shelling, assassination, abduction, and torture against civilians. Worth mentioning, Houthis exploded more than 800 houses for people throughout the country. As the war in Yemen enters its 6th year, the extent of devastation is beyond description, making it the world's worst humanitarian crisis in recent time. The following report shed light on this story.
By mid of 2021, Yemen is at risk of descending into deeper crisis. Recognized as the world's worst humanitarian crisis for the past 5 years, the country is now hurtling towards the worst famine the world has seen in decades. Unprecedented levels of humanitarian assistance helped to avert a famine and other disasters in 2019, yet the underlying drivers of the crisis persist. As the devastating armed conflict continues and the Houthis rebels' political bullying gets insane, vulnerable populations are increasingly unable to cope. Today in Yemen, 30 million people, 2 out of every 3 Yemenis, need some form of humanitarian and protection assistance. Of these, 12.1 million people are in acute need. More than half of the population are facing acute levels of food insecurity. The conflict continues to devastate families, put civilians at grave risk, and cause the death and injury of men, women, girls, and boys. Since its start, the conflict has displaced over 4 million people, making Yemen the 4th biggest internal displacement crisis in the world. The humanitarian situation was aggravated in 2020 by escalating conflict, the COVID-19 pandemic, disease outbreaks, torrential rains and flooding, a desert locust plague, economic collapse and a fuel crisis across northern governorates and reduced humanitarian aid. Shocks such as disease outbreaks, natural hazards and a potential oil spill from the Saifa threaten to cause more suffering for millions of Yemenis. If adequate funding is not received this year, gains achieved will be reversed and Yemen will plunge into crisis. Without sufficient support, life-saving programs will be cut and the consequences for the people of Yemen will be devastating. While ultimately, the only way to end the crisis in Yemen is through a lasting and inclusive peace, right now there is an opportunity to make a difference. Donors are encouraged to seize the opportunity to contribute generously to meet the needs of Yemenis everywhere in the country and help them survive another year.
Masan Project for Mine Clearing announced that 1,882 mines were cleared during the second week of August. According to the project, the healthy mines were planted in populated areas, schools and roads in different parts of Yemen. Masan outlined that mines included 80 anti-personnel and 1,469 anti-tank mines. It added that 403 unexploded shells and 2 explosive devices were also cleared. The war in Yemen has hit hardest those who are the last responsible. This is what Save the Children organization said about war in Yemen. Right now, 93% of children in Yemen are suffering and need assistance due to the violence that continues to devastate the country. Millions of children in Yemen are at risk of death, injury, starvation, and disease. More on this story is within this report.
War in Yemen has hit hardest those who are the least responsible, children. This is what Save the Children organization said about the war in Yemen. Right now, 93% of children in Yemen are suffering and need assistance due to the violence that continues to devastate the country. Millions of children in Yemen are at risk of death, injury, starvation, and death. The war in the country has caused widespread hunger and poverty, leaving millions of children in dire need for food, and they are suffering from malnutrition. Indeed, more than 60 million of Yemenis will face high levels of acute food shortage, with an estimated 21,000 children are at risk of falling into famine. Because of weak health system, thousands of children and families are without medical attention, which is urgently needed for them to survive. Education is a problem too. 2 million children in Yemen are out of school. Those vulnerable boys and girls are at risk of being exploited or abused.
Coming next, Houthi militia take 1/5 of the medical center's revenues.
رجال منذ ثالث سنين على منطقة الروضة، استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع. بيدعي للسلام، يقول له للسلام، يقتل أطفالنا، يقتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت استجعت ولا قلنا يقع واحد صاروخ ثاني، طلعت البيت حقنا عشان ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ انطرح.
Welcome back. The Yemeni journalist syndicate called upon the Houthi rebels to reveal the fate of a journalist who disappeared in the capital Sana'a. The syndicate was informed by the journalist's family that he disappeared in the capital since the 3rd of August in vague circumstances. Yemeni journalist syndicate expressed its concern for the journalist's fate, demanding Houthis who control the capital to investigate and work to return the journalist back to his family, while urging all parties to side journalists out of any conflicts. Sana'a tribe expressed a refusal to Houthi unfair decisions over people's properties. Sana'a Chef Sheikhs announced that the refusal to these measures that will be implemented to take 50% of their properties. Houthis claim that these highlands are state-owned mountains. The tribes warned that these measures will invoke a popular resettlement and asked the Houthi rebels to backtrack. In Zanzibar, capital of Ebyan City, citizens continued their complete civil disobedience for the second week in a row. This step was taken in protest against what the people say is a policy for hunger and against the low standards of living. They protested against the rate drop in the value of the Yemeni currency and against halting payrolls for civilian employees and military staff. In response to the call for civil disobedience, some staff, servicemen, and private sector workers refused to go to their works, and all shops and exchange companies closed their doors. Places of basic servers were only open to noon. More details on the situation in Ebyan are in this report.
For the second week, civil disobedience in Zanzibar, protesting the deteriorating living conditions and the collapse of the currency. In response to a call made by the Committee for Organizing Popular Protests in Ebyan, the city of Zanzibar witnessed this Monday a comprehensive civil disobedience for the second week in a row, in protest of the rejection of starvation policies and deterioration of living conditions, payrolls cut off, and the collapse of the national currency. In response to the call for voluntary civil disobedience, some public and private employees refrained from going to work as traffic in the city stopped by closing all shops and exchange stores, while facilities concerned with providing necessary services to citizens opened from 6 a.m. until 12 p.m. Citizens protested the poor living conditions and demanded an end to the economic collapse the country is witnessing, which was reflected in the prices of food and consumer goods and oil products.
Civil disobedience included all stores and transportation due to the deterioration of services and the local currency collapse, in addition to the interruption of payrolls for a period of months. Those protests are a continuation of previous protests called by the Popular Protest Committee. We thank merchants and those who contributed to the success of this disobedience to deliver a message to all parties that people are tired of the situation and will not remain silent after today on the policy of starvation practiced against them.
The disobedience and demonstrations were ignored by the government, which stood helpless in the face of the unstable conditions and the national currency collapse, considering the ferment and great popular discontent that may lead to a massive revolution against the ruling authorities. The committee calling for civil disobedience indicated that the escalation and disobedience would continue until the legitimate demands that were guaranteed by the law constitution were met.
A source in Sana'a said that the Houthi rebels seized 1/5 of the total daily returns of the medical centers. The source added that the rebels forced the owners of medical centers and private hospitals to monitor accountants through cameras for any manipulation. The militia had raised license fees for the medical sector, which were reflected in a rise in the prices of the medical services provided to Yemenis. Medical staff at the hospital of Al-Makha warned they could go for a public strike against ignoring to pay their payrolls. The staff that the World Health Organization and UNICEF ignored to pay them their salaries despite the heavy load of work and the dangers they face when working in exceptional circumstances. The medical staff complained that they did not receive any salary since the start of the year. The following report has more details.
Doctors and nurses are working really hard in the time of war, trying to save many lives of Yemeni citizens. However, they are receiving nothing in return. The medical staff of the Coronavirus Isolation Center in Al-Makha Hospital warned to go on a general strike, protesting the ignorance of the World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF to pay their salaries. One of the doctors announced to News Yemen that they worked in difficult circumstances and risked their lives to save patients. But today their rights are faced with denial and ingratitude by the World Health Organization and UNICEF. Doctors complain that they have not received any money since January this year and that their demands are being completely ignored by the two United Nations organizations. Last July, the director of Al-Makha Hospital, Dr. Nasr Askar, criticized the World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, for ignoring the salaries of 40 doctors and assistants in the Corona Isolation Center. Askar said the center's workers have not received their salaries for 6 months, although they put their lives at risk and stood in the face of the virus and saved the lives of 577 patients. He stressed that the center, which is the first in the West Coast regions, did not get the operation budget that the organizations promised to deliver in January early this year.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Joint forces deter Houthi militias' advance to front lines in Hodeidah, causing them casualties. The 6-year war in Yemen deepens the humanitarian crisis. The vulnerable children of Yemen suffer as the war continues. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.